Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the NU Writing Talks, Writing to Learn, Engage, and Create. My name is Carrie Paczynski. I'm the director of the Writing Center program in the School of Sciences and Humanities at Nazarbayev University, and I'm happy to welcome you to our inaugural symposium, NU Writing Talks. The idea for this symposium was built upon a webinar that the Writing Center program held for Erasmus Plus in October 2019 to help them celebrate their Erasmus Days. The National Erasmus Office reached out to us and asked us to put something together, a presentation that would be interesting or useful for the educators who are connected to their programs. And they cautioned us, or they asked us kindly, please not to create yet another presentation on plagiarism, how to avoid plagiarism. So my colleagues and I got together and we talked about the idea of presenting the concept of creating an academic culture and what writing looks like within an academic culture. Our Writing Center program's mission is to create a culture of writing across the university. So we picked up on this theme and hosted a webinar that had pretty good participation and a lot of good follow-up questions. Those follow-up questions basically revolved around the idea that creating an academic culture is interesting as a concept, but how do you actually do it? So what are the nuts and bolts of how you teach this idea at your university? And so we have created the NU Writing Talks as an annual symposium with the intention of creating a conversation with our colleagues in Kazakhstan and beyond about how we view the teaching of writing at the university, how we go about doing that, and the sort of vision that we have for creating a culture of academic writing at Nazarbayev University. Okay, so I'd like to start by just letting you know a little bit more about ourselves and how we're situated within the university more broadly. Nazarbayev University is a research institution that was founded in 2010 in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan. And as you can see here from this graphic from the university's webpage, it consists of several schools, many programs, including a foundation preparation program for both undergraduate and graduate students, 20 undergrad programs, 25 master programs, 3 PhD programs. This was as of last year. But the purpose for showing this this data to you is just to show you that that we have a wide range of schools and therefore departments and disciplines that our students study within. And our Writing Center program seeks to serve all of them. Okay. So to give you a sense of numbers and proportionality, these again in the graphic, these are the numbers from last year, and I've updated them with current enrollment numbers from our Office of the Registrar just last week for the number of undergraduate and graduate students that the university currently has. And then I'm highlighting for you how many of those students we're actually teaching in this year. So in this academic year, we are teaching 65% of all of the undergraduates at the university, largely in the core curriculum, in the first and second year core curriculum courses. And we're teaching 12% of the graduate students at the university in classes. Most of those graduate students are a very large cohort of master's students in the School of Engineering and Digital Science. We teach them a technical communication course. So this is just meant to give you a sense of our impact in the university and our reach. And also, the diverse student body that we work with. Most of our students come to us on government scholarship. They come through competitive entry to the university and either go through the foundation program or they come as direct admit. Almost all of our students are multilingual. I would say all of them are multilingual, and none of them, at least for the undergrads, are native speakers of English. And this is important because we are an EMI, we are an English medium institution. So all of our courses are taught in English with the exception of the Kazakh courses. So what this means for us is that all of our students that we teach, all of them are learning English or writing in English as an additional language. We work this into our curriculum. This affords them a host of challenges and also probably even more strengths. Okay. We in the Writing Center program, we're a team of 30 educators, and we are housed in the School of Sciences and Humanities, which is the largest school in the university. So we are the largest academic unit in the largest school of the university. But we are not actually a department that issues diplomas. We don't have majors. We are a teaching and service program. So while we do have a large curriculum, that curriculum is meant to support the curricula at the university. We're integrated into the undergraduate core curriculum as of 2018. We teach every first-year undergraduate that comes through the university. And then those students, once they complete that first-year course of rhetoric and composition, they then go on to take a second-year core course, which they can actually take in their second, third, or fourth years. So all of our students get 2 writing and communication requirements that are delivered by the Writing Center program. Okay. We collaborate with all the faculties, all the schools, all the departments, and the NU library at the university. All right. So just to show you kind of the multifaceted program that we have, that's grown up around us since 2012. The Writing Center, the proper Writing Center, which is faculty tutors supporting writers across the university. All of our tutors are faculty within the Writing Center program. This Writing Center started in 2012 and largely served what was then the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. In 2015, they introduced a first-year composition course that was required for majors in humanities and social sciences, which at that time was not the largest school in the university. They taught that one course and provided workshops and individual Writing Center appointments. As the university grew and developed a core curriculum, our program grew along with it. So in 2018, we instituted the first year of a university-wide core curriculum. We went from teaching about 200 courses, or 200 students, sorry, a year on that first year rhetoric and composition course to in 2015 to this current year where we're teaching about 1,300 students on that rhetoric and composition course. So we've grown exponentially over the past several years, and we've grown up around our Writing Center. Our curriculum has developed, including an undergraduate writing fellows program that trains undergraduate writers to be peer tutors and mentors embedded in courses. And they get academic credit for this while they're doing research on the process as well. So I'm focusing on the curriculum part of what we're talking about here in our facets, because that's what we'll be focused on in this year's symposium. We also have a WAC program. It's a nascent WAC program, and we make an artificial distinction between WAC and Writing Center. We say that Writing Center is for supporting student writers, and WAC is for supporting faculty who are teaching writing in their disciplines. And then when we are face-to-face, we offer writing blocks, which is student writing in social spaces. So these are 3-hour blocks of time in the evenings at a cafe on campus where students come and they sit and they collectively work on their assignments. We're not doing this year because we're all online this academic year. But the last year that we had writing blocks, we averaged about 80 students a week who were attending writing blocks on a regular basis with us. So we counted that as quite successful. The point here is that I love Venn diagrams, but I like representing the facets of our programs this way because they are all inextricably linked. They've grown up around each other. And they're staffed by the same people. We all kind of float between different cohorts. But the point here is that every facet of our program has evolved with the university's growth. and it evolves in response to student needs. So this is an important thing to bear in mind as we're moving into this first panel. And the way that all of these programs are linked is through these core pedagogic principles that we all adhere to, regardless of what we're teaching, whether it's a writing course, a communication course, a tutoring practice in the Writing Center, supporting faculty writers. Every aspect of what we do is supported by these core pedagogic principles. We emphasize rhetorical awareness. We teach writing as a process. We favor a genre approach to teaching writing, and we focus on student experience. So these elements can be seen in every single thing that we do. All right. So as I said, we're really going to focus on the writing and communication courses, the curriculum that we deliver in our program for this year's symposium, because it kind of nicely aligns with the 4 panel discussions that we have planned. So our first panel discussion is going to be held today. And this panel discussion focuses on the first year rhetoric and composition course, that course that every single undergraduate has to take at our university. This is such an important course for us because it serves as a prerequisite for everything. All of the more advanced courses have to draw upon threads. There have to be clear connections between the concepts and the practices that students are learning in this first year course, and then what they do as they move into more division-specific writing or more advanced writing. And even with our communication courses, which are not necessarily writing intensive, the rhetorical awareness element and the focus on genre are still present. Communication is a social activity, obviously, in the same way that communication is a writing is a social activity. So this first year core curriculum course is very important to us, and our first panel today will be talking about that. The second year core curriculum offers 7 options that students may choose from to fulfill this requirement, and it's quite a range. They can take a public speaking course, they can take a technical and professional writing, a science writing course, a course we have called Say What You Mean, which is really framed as rhetorical choice for grammar, or making grammatical choices to satisfy a rhetorical need. We have a writing for digital media course, an advanced composition course, and a creative writing course, creative writing fiction course. So of those courses, all the way from public speaking to creative writing, those courses all pick up on the threads that are established in the first year rhetoric and composition course. And those courses are all considered options for core. Moving on from that, we have third year courses and writing and communication elective courses. Our second panel in our symposium will draw upon the creative writing instruction that we do within the core curriculum and also the electives. So we have a cohort of creative writing instructors that teach that core curriculum course, but they also have more advanced poetry writing seminars. For example, we have an advanced fiction course coming online. This cohort of instructors also is very active in hosting extracurricular writing workshops for students. So they're part of a supportive group of colleagues that advocate very strongly for the role of creative writing in research and academic environments. So we'll be hearing from them on in our second panel next week. The third panel we have will focus on the Writing Fellows sequence and how that course went from 1 Writing Fellows course to a sequence of 3 with a focus on research in writing studies and peer tutoring, embedded peer tutoring and peer mentoring. This course has really blossomed from the idea of teaching what peer tutoring is about to developing senior tutors with a fair amount of expertise and some well-developed leadership skills by the end as they become mentors for other writing fellows. And then our final panel in week 4 on the 24th, we'll talk about graduate writing. We have graduate writing courses, but we also support graduate writers through the Writing Center. So that particular panel will talk about how this is done both at a curriculum level, but then also the sort of separate graduate writing schedule that we have to support graduate writers. Okay, so I hope that these panels sound interesting to you and that you'll join us for all 4 of these. Ask us questions and join us in conversation. Okay, welcome to our first panel discussion for the NU Writing Talk Symposium. This panel is called Putting Philosophy into Practice, Focus on the Student Experience in the Writing Process. This panel was organized and envisioned and organized by one of our colleagues in the SSH Writing Center, Marilyn Plumley, and she was to serve as the moderator today, but she can't be with us, so I'm going to substitute for her in introducing this and moderating this panel and thank her in advance for putting this all together for me. Putting philosophy into practice. This panel will look at the Core 1 course that I mentioned in my opening remarks, the most important course that we teach. We will have, we'll have a focus on, we'll have a focus on the principles and practice of this core writing course. This course is designed to develop genre awareness, metacognitive reflection, and student agency at all stages of the writing process. So in so doing, this course reflects those 4 pedagogic principles that I mentioned earlier. We have 3 panelists who will be speaking on this course. Shane Ellis-Coates is the lead teacher and coordinator for the first year rhetoric and composition course. This is no mean feat. He has to manage roughly 18 instructors a semester who are teaching this course on a shared syllabus and coordinates the validity and reliability of this course across about 80 sections a year. So it's a big endeavor. Each of the 3 speakers on today's panel will represent a different perspective on the course. So given Shane's role, he will be talking about serving as a coordinator on this course and also looking at the challenges of retaining the integrity and the rigor of a course like this. The second speaker is Kirk Peterson. He's a writing and communications instructor who currently teaches this first year course. And since he's joined us, he's exclusively focused himself his work on this course. Kirk will discuss how he conceptualizes his role as a writing instructor. He'll also explain some of the practices in which he engages his students in order to create a discourse community focused on writing. And then finally, we have the contribution from a first year NU undergraduate student, Diana Karabekova, who completed this rhetoric and composition course in the fall semester of 2020. So she will be talking about her growth as a writer through the engagement and activities of this course and the creation of a discourse community, which is one of the focuses of this course. Deanna is with us to give us feedback as well. So she will be making suggestions for how instructors on this course and across the university might better engage students with writing and compare it to her experience before she came to NU. The format of this session. Panelists will speak in succession with some prepared remarks. So all 3 panelists will follow one after the other. And while the panelists are speaking, I'll ask that everybody keep their microphones on mute. And also please keep your videos off. This will help us with bandwidth. After the panelists speak, we'll have an open Q&A session. So during the time that the panelists are speaking, you are welcome to send your questions to the panelists via the chat box. Please specify to which panelist your question is directed so that we can follow up with you at the end of the session. Okay, so with that, I will turn the panel over to our first speaker, Shane Coates.
Okay, thank you, Carrie, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Let me just share my screen very quickly. So yeah, as Carrie mentioned, I'm the lead teacher / coordinator for the core program, one of the courses that we offer, the Rhetoric and Composition 150 course, which is a core requirement for all students. So what I'm going to do in my particular talk, I'm going to look at several aspects of this course and try and link that to what we're discussing in terms of the student experience. I'm going to look at the context of 150, basically where we are in the grand scheme of things in the WCS program. I want to talk a little bit about our course objectives, and especially in terms of how that shapes our approach to the teaching of writing. And I want to talk about some of the challenges that we face as both a core program, a core course, and also as well as a writing course in general, one that is kind of trying to achieve a lot of different goals in terms of preparing students for what they need for their future academic work. I'm kind of hoping that what I talk about today, what I mentioned, some of the points that I raise are going to be kind of form the basis or even the context for some of the points that the other panelists are going to raise. Hopefully, some of the things that Kirk talks about and Diana will expand on what I'm saying in my presentation, and also perhaps illustrate some of the points that I'm trying to make. So just to give an idea of the context of the 150 Rhetoric and Composition course, we are a core requirement, as I mentioned. We are, I guess we would say, well, we're the biggest course, I suppose, of all the courses that we teach in terms of numbers. So all students are required to take this course. And so that means, and Carrie mentioned the numbers before, we have a lot of sections and a lot of students that go through every semester. The way I see this course, in many ways, this is a bridge between the previous training that students have had in terms of their writing skills, and it's a way of bridging that with the higher levels, the things that they're going to have to do later on. I guess in many ways, this is kind of the stepping stone that we try to create for students as they kind of get into the higher levels of academic writing. Many of the students that come to us have gone through the foundation program, the new FIP program. Now, the new FIP program, the foundation program, it doesn't look exclusively at writing, but it does have a writing component. So a lot of the students who've gone through that, they're already familiar with a lot of the concepts and the different genres of writing that we are covering in our course. Now, more and more, we're getting students who are not going through the foundation program. They're coming to us directly, and I'm not sure of the actual numbers, but we're looking at it's going to be close to a 50% split, I think, at some point. And now what that means is that these students are coming to us with a wide variation in the kind of training they've had coming into us, whether they're coming directly from their high schools or whether they're coming through the new FIP program. They're going to have different degrees of writing proficiency, perhaps. And this is based on a lot of different factors. I mean, it could be the training they've had for the writing skills. It may also just be their own individual abilities, language abilities, writing abilities, and whatnot. And so this is where, we have to try and work with these variations in the student abilities. And in terms of what that means for our program, well, I mean, it can mean a lot of different things. On the one hand, we all have to have a standardized program for the students. All students do the same thing. They have the same learning objectives. They do the same tasks and whatnot. So, that doesn't change. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge the fact that, some students may not necessarily be as familiar with a lot of the concepts that we deal with. And this can go, this can take into account a lot of different things. It could be just the register that we use when we describe different aspects of writing. If I talk about a thesis statement, for example, I mean, will that be understood by students who may have been taught a central idea? Little things like that. So it is very much a training ground, I think, for students, and it's where we kind of get them ready, as I mentioned earlier, getting them ready for the work they're going to do in the remainder of their undergraduate studies, and beyond that, certainly if they continue on to do a master's degree or whatnot. So at that point, so this is where I would transition, Carrie.
Okay.
So this will be in the outtakes.
We're going to be so good at this by the time this symposium starts. I'm going to stop recording now, okay?
Okay. Receive some training in their, sorry, I think I'm jumping around there. They would receive some training in terms of writing and whatnot. Although the actual focus of the foundation program is kind of beyond just writing. They touch on a bunch of different areas, but there is a writing component to it. Now, more recently, we're getting a lot of students who have not gone through that program, which means we have students coming in with a wide range of backgrounds and a wide range of experience in terms of the type of training they've received to be academic writers. And for us, this means that, you know, we have to kind of accommodate the fact that these students are coming from different backgrounds. They have different levels of knowledge in terms of writing. But for our own objectives, this is kind of what we want to provide, is that bridge between what they already have, what they need to know as they move forward, as they continue on with their majors. So in many ways, I guess this is a training ground, and this is where we kind of think in terms, we anticipate what they're going to need as they continue on as academic writers, as scholars, if you will. And that forms the basis to pretty much everything that we teach in the course. So to give you an overview, these are the official course aims that guide our program, that guide our syllabus. And you can see here that we kind of touch on a lot of different areas. I mean, for example, in terms of understanding rhetoric and understanding the rhetorical situation of texts, even writing devices and that kind of thing, to give students kind of a foundation for the type of language that they are going to experience in academic writing and the type of language that they're going to utilize as well, and especially in terms of, you know, how that will impact the effectiveness or you know, their ability to communicate as academic writers. Of course, we want them to develop the skills and strategies that they will need as well. So, you know, allowing them to engage in a process approach to development, and this is something I'll come back to a little bit later. But getting students to engage fully in this this process of developing, not just in terms of developing a particular essay, but in terms of the way they approach writing and the way they actually kind of the self-learning mode, you know, the being able to develop as writers on their own as well as they continue on through their academic career. Information literacy and research skills, of course, that's one of the main aims of the program. Critical, thoughtful engagement. I mean, it's what you would anticipate from this type of course. I mean, a course that is going to prepare students for the type of work they have to do as they continue on. Now, obviously, as I said, we and I think Carrie mentioned as well, we incorporate a lot of different things. Carrie mentioned the genre approach and you know, the social engagement or whatever that students will go through. So a lot of what we do will incorporate things like not just feedback from instructors, but things like peer review, discussions about their writing, and these are core elements of our syllabus, so that we are meeting with students on a regular basis, but we're also having them engage in conversations about their own writing, and kind of as a way of analyzing different approaches, different ways of achieving their writing goals. So this is kind of, you know, the basis for our syllabus. So again, as I mentioned, it's a genre. I describe it, or we've described it as a genre-based process approach, and this involves well, there's the element of scaffolding. Of course, that's always there. I mean, the types of assignments, the types of work we have students do will invariably build upon one another as they continue through the semester. So we start out, of course, with kind of a more simplistic writing tasks, things like writing a summary of a text, responding to a text in some way in terms of critical analysis. And, you know, we want students to kind of be able to transfer these skills as they continue on through the semester, as they build on what we're teaching them and add to it. So by the time we get to the end of the semester, the last few weeks of the semester, in fact, are focused primarily on a final major assignment, which is, well, there are two essays. I should just backtrack a little bit. There are two major assignments, one academic essay 1 and academic essay 2. They're both research papers, argumentative papers. And the first essay is kind of, it's really the major building block for when they move into their own topic and when they start developing essay number 2. But all throughout the process, again, students are engaged in conversations and feedback from the instructor in terms of their writing and how to, their needs as writers, highlighting their strengths, and of course, highlighting areas that they need to develop. Another way that we approach this, of course, is through standardized assessment. And this is something that I put a lot of time and effort and thought into for our particular program. And when we talk about standardized assessment, we're talking about things like the use of rubrics, the use of guidelines for assignments, which all teachers will adhere to as they're teaching their courses. And these are important considerations, especially since we have so many different sections of this course, and the numbers are so high. It's essential that we have this standardization of not just the materials that we're using, but in terms of how we're going to assess the students. So there are samples. For instance, if you wanted to see some of these samples of the guidelines that we use and the rubrics, the grading rubrics, you can see that on our website. It's actually in the participant resources for this particular symposium. So you can find those there if you want to take a look at them. I haven't incorporated them into this particular presentation because they're just, as documents, they're text heavy, and we don't really have time and to go through them, and that's not really the purpose of what we're doing here. But it's there if you want to have a look at them. So this is kind of where we this is the starting point for what we try to accomplish with our course. In terms of some of the challenges that we face, and this is where it gets fun. As I mentioned earlier, one of the considerations that we're facing is the variation in student abilities. Now, that can mean different things. On the one hand, it might be, okay, which students have gone through the foundation program, which ones have not. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that students who have gone through the foundation program are going to have an advantage. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, we often have students who come in directly into our program that have not gone through foundations. They come directly into our 150 course, and they're quite strong. I mean, they have a high level of proficiency, and they're able to adjust quite well and to succeed in the course. But again, there are clear variations, and this is a consideration. It's an ongoing thing, and even as I think ahead to upcoming semesters, it's something that needs to be addressed in terms of, what does that mean for us as teachers? How do we accommodate those variations? We want to maintain a standard. All students have the same. We want students to have the same learning outcomes, and they're given the same tasks. But at the same time, finding a way to make sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to the language of what we're teaching, in terms of what they're expected to understand and know, the expectations of the genre that we're teaching, basic things. And sometimes it comes down to the register. I mean, sometimes it comes down to the way students have been taught before. If you're referring to, I mean, on a kind of a very micro level, I mean, if I speak of a thesis statement, how will students interpret that when I speak of a thesis? If I talk about a central claim, little things like that. But to ensure that students are kind of on the same page as they continue on with our program. Another thing that we have to face is addressing some of the misconceptions about academic writing. Now, this spans a number of different areas as well. On the one hand, when I talk about misconceptions, it might be in terms of things like what is expected of an academic writer, and it might be in terms of stylistics, and students seem to have a lot of preconceptions, I guess, about what academic writing is. Sometimes it's based on cultural factors. Different countries, different cultures have different views, different beliefs about what constitutes academic writing or scholarly writing. Sometimes it's based on what they've been told, what their instructors have told them in the past, in terms of what makes good academic writing. And they're not all misconceptions, but I think sometimes it's a matter of saying or showing students that, good writing is something that, well, it can be interpreted in many different ways. And trying to emulate a certain particular style that you believe to be the ultimate in academic or scholarly writing is not necessarily going to always work for you. I think another misconception as well is in terms of the process approach. What kind of activities or what kind of process, for lack of a better word, are students going to engage in as they develop their writing skills? Students have a tendency many times to see writing as a linear process. I'll sit down, I'll make an outline. We encourage students to make outlines. They don't always, but make an outline, write my first draft, get my feedback, revise, submit. And we try to tell them that it's okay. This is sure that might work sometimes, but usually it doesn't. So this idea of how does one develop one's writing skills, what's involved in that, or how does one even develop a given task, an assignment, a research paper, getting them to engage in this cyclical process where it's not a question of just sitting down and writing until you're finished. It's a matter of thinking about what you want to write, creating a strategy for how you're going to develop your writing, really just thinking about it. And I often tell my students that we call it it's a writing process, but it's really a thinking process, and it's really engaging with not just with the subject matter, but with the genre of writing as well, and understanding your own objectives as a writer, but also the needs of the particular genre that you're writing in. Standardized assessment, of course, this is another factor, and I've mentioned this already as one of the important factors that I deal with on a regular basis. From an ethical standpoint, it's important that students are kind of receiving not just the same type of instruction, obviously, and when I say this type of, I don't mean the instructor style. I'm talking about what they're being taught in the classroom. Are we achieving our objectives for the course? And we facilitate this, of course, by ensuring that everyone has the same set of guidelines for various tasks, and the teachers will adhere to that, and of course so will the students as well. So these create the objectives, or these will facilitate the outcomes that we're hoping for, ideally, and even to the point that it helps instructors in terms of being able to anticipate what students are going to need, and what's going to have to be put in place for them as they engage in these writing processes. Then, of course, there's the grading aspect, and this is where the rubrics come into play. And since I came on as the course lead, I've done a lot of work in terms of revising these rubrics and even some of the guidelines for the different tasks. It's a conversation that happens amongst the cohort, amongst our teachers, usually through norming sessions, where we sit down and we basically we look at different papers together, and we grade them based on the rubric. That enables us to kind of, it's kind of like a meeting of the minds, in the sense that, okay, this is what the rubric says. Are we interpreting it in the same way? And we've had some pretty interesting conversations about that, because first of all, there's the way we interpret the language of the rubric, which I think conversation really helps us to smooth those things out. When I hear someone's perspective, it kind of enables me to think about how I'm interpreting the rubric as well, and that makes a huge difference. That's very important, and that's one aspect. But of course, when it comes to rubrics, it's also how we use the rubric, making sure that, and I know I'm speaking to the instructor side of it here, but this will play into the student, how it affects students as well. So making sure that we are using the rubric at least in the same way, when we are assessing our work. Ideally, if things go as hoped, then ideally I should be able to take any piece of writing from any course, from any of our classes, any of our sections, and grade that piece of writing and essentially get the same outcome as the instructor would. But again, this is kind of the ideal version that we're aiming for. And it's an ongoing process. I mean, even now, we're going through a process of revision and change heading into next fall. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. I think another challenge that we face, and this is something that perhaps Diana can speak to as well, is how we differentiate the course from previous experiences that the students have had. And that comes from feedback that we receive from students, sometimes in the student surveys and sometimes anecdotally, where students will say things, or some students will say, yeah, I already studied this. I know all this. I've learned this before. I did it in foundation, or so this idea of the problem with that, of course, is that students fail to see the point, I guess, of what we're trying to accomplish. Now, that opens up another area of debate. I mean, I don't know where these perspectives come from. I don't know if students are homing in on a certain component of the course that they recognize and they say, well, I've done this before. Or if they feel that, okay, the course is not challenging enough. It's not rigorous enough for me. I wasn't really challenged to do anything. It was easy and there was nothing to it. There's no learning involved in that. And we want to avoid that. We want students to come away from the course thinking, well, okay, yeah, that was something different. That was something new. Not entirely different, because a lot of the same things will turn up again and again as students, from whatever training they've had before, they come to us and then they're going to see that reflected. They'll see some of the same things recurring. But in terms of what we add to that actual, their understanding of academic writing. And sometimes this has come up in conversation, and I think Kirk has mentioned this a couple of times in previous meetings. Sometimes it might be a question of actually explaining to the students. I mean, telling the students, showing them directly, here is how we are different from other courses. You may have learned this. Okay, this is the new direction that we're going to go to, or go, the next level of this particular writing. That is a challenge for us, because, as I said, we want students to come away feeling as though they've benefited from what we've done. And I think overall, a lot of students do. I mean, according to the survey results, a majority of students say that, yeah, okay, it was challenging, I learned something. But there's still a significant number that will say, no, I didn't really gain that much from the course. The future challenges. So what we're looking at now is the main concern that I have is the increasing numbers. So the caps on our courses are increasing, and it looks as though they will continue to increase probably in the next, I'm not sure about the next semester, but definitely the semester after that. Now, what that means for us is that, from a very pragmatic standpoint, one of the major components of the course is the feedback that we give. I mean, this is a writing development course, and in order for that to work, we have to provide students with feedback, a lot of feedback. And whether this feedback is through individual consultations, or there's the feedback that we give in the assessment of their work. And I know, having spoken to a lot of different instructors, I mean, instructors give a lot of feedback, and it takes a long time to grade papers. So there are two concerns here. When we're looking at higher numbers of students, it means, well, we need more time to grade their work. Now, okay, you might say, well, okay, that's part of the job, isn't it, to grade papers? So what's the problem? Well, yes, absolutely. And it does take time. I mean, I know personally for most assignments, I'm looking at an average of anywhere between 40 minutes and an hour to provide assessment on one item, one assignment. And when you multiply that by a number of sections, okay, you're looking at 60 to 70 students or more. And so this is time that has to be put into this. Now, sure, it gets done, but at the same time, the other factor is that we want to be able to give students timely feedback, because remember, the course doesn't stop just because we're grading. which means we have to get on top of the grading. We have to get it done in a reasonable time frame so that students can benefit from the feedback that we give them as we move into the next assignment or the next stage of their writing or whatever. Now, one possible solution that often comes up, and we're kind of looking at some of these solutions now, is, do we take away certain course components? Do we kind of prioritize certain things over others and remove certain graded components? That's one option. Although it's more of a redistribution. I mean, I'm thinking ahead to what's going to happen with our program come fall. I won't get into the details, but in a nutshell, we're trying to maintain a level of feedback that will benefit the student, but also not overwhelm us as instructors. But at the same time, we don't want to lose the rigor of the course. We can't just cut things out and for the sake of saving time. There still has to be the challenge. The course has to maintain a certain level of rigor, and we do expect we expect a lot from our students, frankly speaking, and not just in terms of what they are expected to produce, but in terms of the amount of work and effort that they are supposed to put into it. And of course, this all comes back to, as I've said several times, maintaining the quality of our feedback to make sure that students benefit from what we provide in terms of helping them, achieve their development goals. So I think I've gone over time a little bit, so I'll stop right there and hand it back to Carrie, and I think she's going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Shane. Okay, so thanks for giving us an overview of this course and how you sort of juggle this and how we're trying to maintain the balance between the realities of teaching students in a very individualized environment and supporting them, while at the same time managing this rapid growth of the university that I spoke about at the beginning of the presentation. So to pick up on this point, I would like to introduce Kirk Peterson. So he is an instructor who's experiencing all of these things that Shane was just talking about, but also very keen to enact those pedagogic principles that were highlighted at the very beginning of the presentation for creating a course, a different type of rhetoric and writing course for students that would support them into developing into individual and academic voices.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you everyone for logging on today and kind of being participating in the first ever NU Writing Center program, Writing Talk Symposium. This is very exciting. Today, my contribution is really going to be about kind of sharing how I allow meta concepts for writing, for the college writing classroom, to inform my philosophy and then transfer those philosophies into actual practice. And hopefully what will come through is the ways in which this connects to a lot of what Carrie already said about our kind of culture of writing here, what Shane touched on in terms of challenges, right, desired outcomes of the work we do. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share screen and we can get started. Oops, fix that. Okay. All right. So as I said, my contribution here is mostly about how we can use certain philosophies, transfer them to practice to really highlight the student experience, which is a major kind of goal, tenet, overarching philosophy of the work that we want to do here. And I think it's particularly important in this kind of first year rhetoric and composition course, because as we've already talked about, this is the bridge, right? We're preparing students from moving forward, right? Coming from earlier writing instruction, we're giving them the space essentially to develop, to level up with the goal of leaving them with something sustainable. Strategies, ways to interact with rhetoric and the writing process that give them a sustainable kind of point of view in terms of moving forward in their careers. So today I'm going to share my philosophies and practices and my experiences teaching first-year college writing. And much of what I'm going to address is specific to my experience here at NU teaching rhetoric and composition. And as Carrie said, since I've joined the team, that's been my focus. I've been teaching 150 exclusively, 3 sections a term. So I've really kind of felt like I've had the opportunity to address and evolve with the needs of the students. So that's what I'm going to kind of contribute today. But I think that the concepts that I'm going to present are going to be useful to any first-year college writing instructor to kind of addressing the major challenge, which is situating the hard work of academic writing for students, right? For students when they come to you, preparing them for writing throughout their university experience, and then in their disciplines, and then hopefully beyond, right? Further on into their careers throughout their entire lives. So before I get started, in the spirit of this, I want to acknowledge that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is the result of applied collaboration, okay, with students as well as my colleagues, past and present. So this kind of fits into the spirit of what I want to talk about today. This idea that anything that we do as learners, as instructors, as writers, as educators, we can't have progress in a vacuum, right? And we can't have progress without intention. So this actually segues nicely to kind of situating what I'm going to do. The first movement of my contribution to today's panel. So I'm going to discuss how 2 key threshold concepts of writing instruction are centralized in my teaching philosophy and in my practice. And these kind of meta concepts, these concepts of writing, really apply to the goals and the philosophies and the culture that we're trying to build here at NU within our Writing Center program, and particularly in our early writing classes. So the concepts that I'm going to talk about, well, first of all, if you're interested in the concept overall of these threshold concepts and how they can contribute to student engagement and kind of contribute to your philosophies as an instructor, I want to recommend the text by Adler-Kastner and Wardell. It's called Naming What We Know, Threshold Concepts in Writing Studies. So to kind of situate what I'm going to talk about, these 2 threshold concepts that I'm going to focus on, to kind of move into how I put them into practice. This text itself outlines a series of meta concepts. So there's plenty, right? And the whole point is it's designed to highlight the active functions of writing. Okay, it's very suitable to assign to students as well, because a lot of these explorations within the text of these meta concepts, of these different threshold concepts, are very short, right? 1 or 2 pages to address how these things work, okay? So if you're interested in this concept as we move through it, I do suggest that text, and there will be, it is included in my reference slide at the end of the presentation, okay? So the 2 concepts that I find most useful to invite new academic writers into thoughtful engagement with the process are writing as a rhetorical and social activity, and writing as a knowledge-making activity, all right? Taken together and contextualized through explicit scaffolding, practice, and kind of low-stakes formative assignments, these concepts can create a space, and by space here, I mean that culture, right? In which students can move beyond task-based approaches to formal writing and see themselves as writers. So the point is they become active agents that are doing the work to generate ideas and contribute to larger conversations. So here on this slide, I've outlined how I hope to contextualize the particular threshold concepts in moving from philosophy to practice. I'm going to address each concept in its broader sense, then talk about how specifically it features into my course learning and ecology. So putting it into practice, right? How do I drill down these larger threshold concepts into actual accessible moments, artifacts of learning, right, that the students can engage with? And then I'll discuss the rationale for the outcomes of these approaches in the student college writing classroom, okay? So hopefully this will all come together. We will go from kind of broad to more specific to kind of discussing how this answers some of the things that Shane brought up in the previous presentation. So I want to start with this quote from Kevin Rusin to consider the ways in which writing is a social and rhetorical activity. Carrie mentioned this at the top of the panel. This is so important to the work we do here. So I'm just going to read this quote for you guys because it's a lot of text. Writing puts the writer in contact with other people, but the social nature of writing goes beyond the people writers draw upon and think about. It also encompasses the countless people who have shaped the genres, tools, artifacts, technologies, and places writers act as they address the needs of their audience, okay? So from my point of view and my experience, the most important first step in bringing students into the early academic writing and bridging the gap, as Shane mentioned, we act as this kind of, bridge builder for the students, bridging the gap between earlier writing instruction and the work that they're going to be doing in their disciplines, is moving them away from the ideas of writing as a kind of a solitary act, okay? Something that happens in this single place in time, and something that's focused on producing a text for the purpose of producing a text, right? Moving the student away from this vision of themselves when they enter into the process of sitting down, hunched in front of their laptop on their dorm room beds, right? 3 hours before a writing assignment is due, and boom, that's where the writing act occurs. So thinking about writing as a social and rhetorical activity and really highlighting that for the student allows them to kind of move, we can bring them into this conversation about writing about process, right? But we also bring them into the conversation about writing as a service to a community, right? Writing as a contribution to a social unit, okay? So essential to the idea of rhetorical writing, kind of as we know, are the ideas of conversation, exchange, and audience, okay? So inherently social there. But of equal importance is the social in the sense of a community with a shared understanding of concepts and goals, where everyone has equal access to tools and strategies developed by other writers. So this also includes acknowledging agency for your students and contributing to the expansion of those strategies and practice, and then kind of letting them know, situating the accountability to the community that comes along with that. So by inviting students into a community of academic writers, it gives them a place to engage in process and a sense of support as they enter into the hard work of academic writing. It's important that you give them the space to see themselves as part of a larger social unit, at least in my experience, and this social unit being all focused on the same learning goals. So this allows students to focus on the value of their writing work as a kind of machine for generating and activating ideas in the context that transcends a kind of by rote approach to completing formal assignments. So how do we do that, right? How do we apply this idea, this threshold concept, and present it to the student as a useful kind of step on the journey of learning and moving into their disciplines as writers? So the key thing here is to establish a discourse community. So this is the way I reinforce that writing is a rhetorical and social activity. And it tends to work in my experience. It's actually a very useful way to situate the way that they're going to be engaging in their writing work in the course, right? And the way that it is valuable, right? Kind of throughout this situational exchange. So acknowledging the various critiques and interventions and expansions of the concept of the discourse community since it was introduced into kind of writing instruction pedagogy. I focus for the students on contextualizing the concept of the discourse community in the most basic sense. So I provide them with a simplified definition. I kind of drill down the definition. It's based on linguist John Swell's an early description, I think, in 1990, and then kind of expanded in 1998, okay? So, but for the purposes of the class and for the students, and for myself, right, for the instructor as part of the discourse community refers to a group of people with shared goals situated around a common interest, and in our case, genre. Okay, so now this focus of genre gets kind of introduced from the very beginning, as Carrie said, from the first day of the first writing course that we bring the students into here at the university, okay? So this genre, right, who acknowledge a set of values and use shared language to collectively achieve said goals, okay? So here on the slide is a common approach to mapping a discourse community, right? Essentially, this could be applied to mapping any kind of discourse community. Here on the slide, I formulated it, filled it in to specifically refer to mapping a discourse community for our rhetoric and composition course. So here we have the interest, the genre, right? Rhetorical writing. It becomes clear how we're all unified around a common interest. Our goals are effective written communication, critical thinking, supporting reasoned claims, all of these kinds of things that, that Carrie and Shane both already mentioned, okay? Importantly, values here are represented by academic honesty, accountability. Most important to me in terms of establishing values is presenting collaboration and support as a value of our discourse community, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then finally, what I find very useful in something that Shane mentioned in his report in terms of kind of situating the work that we do, right? How is this different, differentiating it from other courses, is really leaning into the concept of the shared language of the discourse community, right? Here we can consistently present, reiterate, and define the key terms, the key words that are essential to the work that we're going to be doing in our particular discourse community. So I introduced the concept of the discourse community the very first thing, the very first day of the course, and then we talk about it, right? So we give the definition, I ask them to consider the definition, and then we discuss the general idea. And so part of this is asking students to consider the definition in terms of maybe a situation outside of the academic space, right? We talk about special interest clubs and how they can be discourse communities, fandoms, sports teams, and as the discussion goes, the list kind of grows and grows. But the point is that they begin to understand that they can and will move through a variety of discourse communities throughout their lives and essentially at any given time. So then this gives us the opportunity to discuss what might be these shared interests, goals, values, and languages for discourse communities related to their intended majors, right? Their intended areas of study or academic disciplines as they move forward, okay? So then once we've done that, I move on to introducing learning outcomes as shared goals, course policies as shared values, and I used the course title, simply the course title, Rhetoric and Composition, to introduce the concept of shared language. And this begins a process of keywording that I continue throughout the entire term, which again, I'll talk about a little bit in a little bit more detail later. Now, something that's great for instructors, and I think for students as well, is that if you introduce the discourse community as soon as you close that door at the beginning, as soon as the class starts, then on this first day, then this tedious but necessary presentation of the syllabus actually becomes an active learning artifact, right? We're not just presenting the syllabus. We can use the syllabus to frame the discourse community so that, you know, I don't know, that 15 minutes we put in at the top of the class doesn't feel just kind of like a tedious rote waste of time. Okay, so it may be useful here to address not only how the concepts of the discourse community is contextualized and presented to the students early on, but to talk about what the development of the discourse community specifically for a first-year writing class might look like and how to reinforce the students' place in it throughout the writing process and throughout the term. So it's important to note that addressing shared interests as genre and learning outcomes as shared goals amongst first-year writing or college writing discourse communities is particularly useful in helping students distinguish earlier foundational writing instruction from the differently focused work that they're going to be asked to do in this new learning environment. So again, here we address some of these issues that we've seen arise or that we're constantly, these challenges, right, that we're constantly adapting to as instructors in our rhetoric and composition courses in this kind of bridging the gap transitional course where we invite them in, but we have to send them off with sustainable skills. Oops, not quite yet. Okay, so not only does this frame the deeper engagement with the writing process as building on what came before, but it allows them to consider the interests and goals of the course as a kind of leveling up, which I think is very important. It's a preparation, right, for adapting to other discourse communities in their academic careers. This can be particularly useful for the instructor as a reference point, in my experience, to return to clarifying misconceptions. Remember, another one of the challenges Shane mentioned about new writing strategies that students are going to be asked to master. So for example, in my experience commonly comes up, rhetorical approaches can be new to students, or at least the way they situate rhetorical approaches. Okay, so if we situate these concepts as interests and goals, particularly to the discourse community that they've just entered, it can clearly delineate a space to adapt and consider these new forms of communication, right? To adapt what they're coming in with, these expertise and skills from earlier writing instruction, to the new goals and the new shared interests that they're engaging with. So I'd like to move along to talking about shared values and the role that they can play. So focusing on collaboration and support as a shared value, as I've already kind of previewed, in the discourse community, highlights the rhetorical and social aspect of writing in a very important way. It prepares the students for workshopping activities, providing peer feedback, and understanding the validity of their contributions to group discussion, okay? Here, collaboration and support as a value of the discourse community becomes a kind of social contract. So in my experience, consistently referencing collaboration and the exchange of ideas in this way, it just creates a more thorough engagement at the end of the day. The students begin to frame their participation in an active service to their peers. And particularly in my experience here with the groups of students that we get, framing their participation in the course this way, workshop, peer review, discussion, it just really it can really institute or encourage this above and beyond response, right? Whether it be in online forums and replies, class discussions, small group workshops, peer review particularly, I've seen it be very, very effective, right? When we make sure that we go into peer review, understanding that we're referring back to this social contract, this shared value. In general, it just creates a more focused form of communication, student to student and student to teacher, that in my experience becomes more situated towards this concept of mutual success. So in the interest of time moving forward. So as an instructor, I've also found that focusing more intentionally on the concept of shared language within the discourse community not only improves students' grasp of core course concepts, but improves student to student and student to teacher communication overall. This is kind of an extension of talking about values, but here we get to situate actual language, keywords, concepts as keywords, okay? In doing this, requests for feedback or guidance become much more straightforward. And this creates an efficiency in terms of providing feedback. Assessment's more manageable. This is something that we all struggle with. And requests for clarification on the assessment are fewer. And in my experience, the more I leaned in to the shared language, the keywording of concepts, significantly instances of pushback on feedback and scores for major assignments, they just decreased. So kind of, this was an evolution for me because at first I found, reflecting back, it was easy for me to take for granted that the language including in across my resources, right? Writing practice, assignment instructions, activity prompts, I kind of took for granted that they were clearly situated and consistently defined for the student. So in scaffolding writing strategies, for example, I would assume that the functions of the concepts and the elements of the writing process were clear, as long as at the time I was presenting them, I didn't get any clarifying questions, okay? Only to reiterate them later, which is an important part of the work we do, and kind of get these faces, these furrowed brows, right? It's the struggle for complete recollection of the concepts. So this is when I decided to lean into the shared language of the discourse community through intentional and regular keywording. So it was kind of, there was a sense of hard work going into it, right? Really thinking about the consistency of how concepts were being referenced and the regularity of engagement with keywords in connection with various points in the writing process. So I set out to highlight keywords in shorthand consistently across course materials and pay close attention to when I address those keywords in discussions, learning guides, all of these resources that we provide, okay? So once I adjusted these materials in the resources, I made myself become particularly aware of any time I referred to a concept as a keyword verbally. And at these times, I would engage with a kind of meta commentary, right? So I would underscore the appearance of the word if it came up again in discussion or in scaffolding. I'd say things like, there's that word again, right? Or I'm like, okay, you guys are gonna get tired of hearing this. This always comes up because it's important, right? And at that moment, we kind of highlight the word and its reemergence. And then we kind of talk about it, ask a student, right, to describe this keyword, to define the keyword for the class. And doing this consistently throughout the term not only situates them within the process, but it kind of, it gives us this solid unity as a discourse community in terms of the way we're communicating with each other to meet the shared goals. And a primary is, well, something important too, I wanted to mention that it doesn't just strengthen the effective communication, but it allows the students to adapt to this recursive writing process, the concept of the recursive writing process, because the keywords themselves become artifacts, okay? These keywords become learning artifacts that represent these concepts. So they become communal property of the discourse community, and the students can kind of carry them around and swap them out and apply them at will and wherever necessary in the writing process. So by approaching the shared language this way, I found that it really gives them tools to navigate this kind of recursive writing process that might not be familiar to them. And a primary example of this kind of early keywording and the reiteration that I engage with is the concept of metacognition. So we shorthand this for the purpose of our discourse community as thinking about thinking, and apply it to our shared interests as a discourse community as thinking about writing. So this keywording and positioning of metacognition as an essential piece of shared language for us, the students then are able to position themselves not only within the discourse community, but at the center of their own recursive work. So here I want to transition to the next threshold concept that contributes greatly to my teaching philosophy. And this is writing as a knowledge-making activity. At face value, this seems very simple. I'll let you guys kind of engage with this quote on your own. I believe the PowerPoints will be available in the resources that I think Carrie already linked to in the chat after this. But considering this threshold concept, this idea of writing as a knowledge-making activity, allows the student and in some ways reminds the instructor this delineation between the final product of writing and what writing as process can actively generate for the writer. So approaching first-year college writing instruction, specifically with this in mind, contributes to student success in a number of ways, or it can. So in the kind of most obvious sense, it can help move conceptions of writing away from this commonly held belief that when we write, we simply discover ideas that already exist, right? That a text might be meant to compile or represent or report or even engage in analysis solely on existing pieces of knowledge. So focusing on writing as a knowledge-making activity underscores the fact that the act of synthesizing one's ideas with the ideas of others in support of a reasoned claim should often, and actually just does, right, result in the creation of new ideas or points of view or new ways or kinds of knowing. But I want to talk about how I apply another sense of this philosophy and how that applies to the power of informal writing to help student writers generate a different kind of more immediate knowledge. So the knowledge making here is connected to metacognitive reflections on the writing process and a kind of self-to-self communication, okay, intended to guide students in generating an awareness or actually a kind of construction of their identities as writers. Often when they come to us this first year, this first interaction with college level academic writing, they haven't constructed their identities of writers. They haven't had the opportunity to engage in a way where they start to say, ask the question, what kind of writer am I? Okay, so, pardon me. All right, so the way that I set to put this philosophy into practice is the first year college writing classroom is by leveraging reflecting writing to encourage students to acknowledge levels of writing expertise that are essentially gained through previous experience and hard work, but at the same time, these reflections ask the students to thoughtfully consider their personal approaches to the writing process. All right, they reflect on tendencies as readers, planners, composers, reviewers, and editors. So the exercises are collectively situated as writing process journal. Okay, so this is the overall assignment, and they engage with it throughout the term, really over the entirety of the term. Okay, so initially, my primary motivation for developing the writing process journal assignment was to help the students dispel the myth of the born writer. Okay, so I feel this is a common thing that students come in with early academic writing everywhere. Writers are born. I'm not a writer. Okay, and I want them through reflection to understand that writing, like anything else, is a kind of intentional work. And that understanding who they are as writers is the important step, right? Improving writing and engaging in sustainable writing activities and processes. So the writings still serve that purpose, but they also filter in now. They've evolved to really highlight this metacognition, this metacognitive approach to processes and issues. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I have provided a teaching artifact that includes all 10 of the writing process journal entry prompts in their current forms, as I kind of present them as the overall writing process journal in my current classes. Those will also be included in those materials that will be accessible to participants in the symposium that Carrie linked to in the websites. Okay, so I want to kind of look at how I situate the kinds of reflections that I ask them to do. And I do this in 3 contexts. And those 3 contexts are acknowledging experience, acknowledging informal practice, and kind of acknowledging personal process. So I'm going to just move on and look at that. So on this slide, again, you'll have access to this after the symposium or after today's presentation. But here I've provided an example of one of the entries, and this entry illustrates a focus on acknowledging expertise. So often reflection prompts that ask the students to do this kind of work, to reflect on their experience as writers, are crafted with the intention of guiding them through a thoughtful consideration of levels of expertise, as well as their awareness of areas for improvement. And most of these prompts also include guiding questions that at least implicitly acknowledge that writing is a kind of labor. And because of that, it comes with challenges to be intentionally considered and eventually overcome. So the example here is an example of the first journal entry prompt. And I find that this one, entering into the discourse community, right, asking them to do this early on, it's not only useful for the student in situating their expectations for the course, but it's also an important resource for the instructor, because you get an opportunity to consider the collective and individual needs of these new members coming into the discourse community, right, that you're essentially guiding them through and leading them into. Okay, a second context that I ask them to engage with in reflection is this concept of acknowledging informal practice. And here, this example, which I'll let you read on your own at another time, because I'm going over time already, is situated around inquiry, this concept of inquiry, and guides them into inquiry-based research, preparing for a research-based argumentative essay. So this prompt asks the student to consider the value of inquiry outside of formal academic environments. So the rationale for these kinds of prompts is to just demystify what might be challenging concepts to kind of originally grasp. And it really offers the opportunity to reflect on moments that they engage with these informally, when the stakes weren't high, and it probably came naturally to them. So this serves to frame the work that's being entered into as achievable and also practically useful. And then the final context that I'm going to address in terms of how I engage or how I ask students to engage in reflection is the concept of acknowledging personal process. So the prompt presented here it's presented after the student turns in their first essay. Okay, so this asks them to reflect on an entire situation, movement of process, right? These prompts don't always, the prompts situated against process don't always do that. They can ask students to reflect on a particular point in the process as well. But the idea here is the written reflections present, present for the students this new emerging kind of awareness, right, of how they approach each step of the writing process. Understanding that we're not doing a by rote kind of exercise here. In moving through the writing process, we have to acknowledge our personal approaches, right? To develop best practices for the way we engage with process, writing process specifically, and the recursive writing process. So this also sets the stage for the work we do as a discourse community because, well, first of all, let me talk about the way that these can be presented. When we're in person, I will usually present the writing process journal prompts at the very beginning of a class as a way to allow the students the opportunity to shift modes, right? From whatever they're coming into the classroom with, right? Shifting the modes. What do we do here? We write, right? Reflecting on what, who am I? I'm a writer. So this will not only allow them to further their constructor of the writer's identity, but it will prepare them practically for the kinds of work we're going to be doing within the discourse community on that day. It also sets the stage for, So in general, these reflections exercises are well received, and I'm kind of always surprised by the levels of engagement some students exhibit, right? These are graded according to completion, and they're lower stakes. But I've seen word counts that have literally blown my mind. There's a sense when they sit down to reflect on these things that the reflections build on themselves and continue to unfold. And I've seen word counts soar in terms of engaging here. And I've also been surprised by in evaluations, how many students acknowledge the benefits of the assignment, the practical benefits. And I've even had a student come to me and let me know that they've incorporated reflective journaling in other parts of their academic and personal lives. So it's also important for the instructor. It's a nice resource for the instructor because not only are the students building this construction of their identities of a writer, but you get to track it, right? It's another form of evaluative material. It's another way to gauge your success in terms of getting students to engage with concepts and to internalize these concepts. The final entry obviously asks them to compare their first entry in terms of how they were thinking about writing and who they were as writers, and say at the end of the course how they see themselves as writers here. So in my experience, the language used and the references to process in the final prompts really clearly indicate, not just for the student, but for the instructor, how the reflection process has set them up to move forward, right? To go forward in college level writing. So finally, I want to kind of conclude by thinking, just kind of returning mentally, considering, reflecting on those threshold concepts, writing as a rhetorical and social activity, and writing as a knowledge-making activity, and thinking about what the intended outcomes here are, right? Pointing this back to Carrie's talk about our culture and the tenets of our program, and Shane's reference to kind of challenges and the things that we continually adapt to address, all right? So thinking about these two threshold concepts for me, applying them to my personal philosophy, and then presenting them in practice in a way to the students allows us to kind of think about the way that first year college writing, like what the major goals are, right? For me, it's about giving the students this lasting and expandable toolkit, right, of successful written communication. The idea here and the hope is moving on to other genres, moving on to other discourse communities, right? These concepts of the discourse community, of reflective writing and mapping your process, right, gives them a sense that they can apply what they've learned, the work they've done, in a way that can be kind of shifted, mutable, adapted, can meet the needs and goals and interests of a variety of disciplines. And the real hope here is that they take what they learn in the class from that first informal piece of writing, right? And it moves through, those skills move through to the PhD dissertation, right? We continue to think about ourselves, our identities of writers. We continue to think about our contribution of ideas to the discourse communities of which we have voluntarily chosen to become a part of. What are our accountabilities in those discourse community spaces, okay? And finally, I just want to point out that obviously this has been an opportunity for me to reflect on the work that I've been doing in my classrooms, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that and hope this was useful for you. But it's all about adaptability for the instructors as well. For me, adapting the philosophy to practice in service of creating a student-centered approach to rhetorical communication in the writing process is constantly evolving in response to the needs of the students. And I think that that's a key takeaway, is constantly kind of, and this is another benefit of the discourse community. You're a member, not a gatekeeper, right? So that it allows you to collaborate and evolve your practices in the ways that you are putting philosophies into practice. So, of course, in any learning environment, it's an infinite work of progress. And I think that I've gone over time, so that's where I'm going to leave you guys with today. Again, this PowerPoint will be available to you since I had to run through some things pretty quickly. But thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And I think that I'll throw it back to Carrie so that she can introduce my former student, Diana.
Okay, I need to step in for a second. So Carrie is having internet problems right now at the moment. I'm not sure if she's managed to get back in or not. So on her behalf, I will introduce the next speaker, and that is Diana. Now, Diana is a first-year student, I believe, at Nazarbayev University. Undeclared major? Okay, and she is from Shymkent, in fact, which is a place I haven't had a chance to get to yet, but I look forward to seeing there someday. So, Diana, I will give it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just a moment, I will open my presentation. Oops. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I am a first-year student at Nazarbayev University, currently undeclared student, but I'm intended to major in world literature, linguistics, and culture major. Also, as previously was said, I took the rhetorics and composition course in fall 2020. So, and my instructor was Professor Peterson, so I can share my student experience where Professor Peterson applied all the approaches that he previously presented. So I do not have many slides. I would just like to share with you my outline of today's speech. I will try to deliver my experience as short as possible. And first thing is the differences between strategies and approaches that were presented in rhetorics and composition course, and the way for example, my academic writing was before I've come to the university and took the rhetorics and composition course. So basically, as we know, at high school, for example, we are mostly assigned essays where we have standardized structures and way to deliver our opinion. And basically, we usually do not use some academic researches or other writing techniques as, for example, we have now at university. So, for example, today, for example, in fall, in rhetorics and composition course, we were introduced to the writing approaches like peer review, and that we learn how to write annotated bibliography and evaluate all our sources that we will include in our academic papers. And for example, in our class, Professor Peterson introduced us the writing process journal and weekly writing assignments that helped us a lot to keep up with every week's lessons and assignments. And also one thing to mention is that writing process journal really helped us to reflect on our skills, for example, in the beginning of the course and also at the end of the course, so we could compare how we improved our writing skills, and just to reflect on the whole experience during the course. Coming to the challenging elements of this course, I would highlight that obviously it was writing the argumentative essay, where we had to draft 6-7 pages essay completely from the scratch, where we had to find our own academic sources all by ourselves and evaluate them, write annotated bibliography, approaches like writing approaches that really helped us to overcome this big challenge for us as a like first year students was, as I mentioned, writing, for example, annotated bibliography. The good thing about it was that we had an opportunity to receive feedback before implementing those academic sources to our writings. And also annotated bibliography helped us a lot to evaluate every source, to understand if it is applicable for our topics of interest, and are they good enough to incorporate them to our writings, and also receiving feedback from our instructor before before starting to incorporate them into our essays. Also, coming to the writing process reflection activities, as it was mentioned before, it is the writing process journals. The one thing that I really liked about it, and I think that my peers would support that, is that writing process journals, we had some here guided questions, which also helped us to see that these concepts and the key terms used in, for example, rhetorics and composition course can be applied and even used by ourselves in daily lives. For example, I remember that for example, Professor Peterson asked us to tell us about our experience when we used some logical facts and arguments when we were discussing about a particular topic with our friends or maybe peers or at school and anywhere else. So basically, after that, we could understand that it was for example, rhetorical appeal, which is called logos. And then we understand that these rhetorical terms are not just concepts that is helpful in writing process, but we can also apply them in daily life. And they are not the thing that is needed only in discourse, but can be applied in everyday life. And the last thing I would talk about is suggestions. Well, here I would agree with the Professor Coates about the foundation, about the similarities between programs in foundation year and in the course of rhetorics and composition. So I'm an ex-foundation student, and I've seen some similarities between these two courses, but I would also like to mention that even though there are some similarities in, for example, constructing or writing annotated bibliography and peer reviewing, but also we learned a lot of new things and also new concepts that weren't taught in foundation year. And my suggestions maybe to other instructors would be to apply the concept of writing process reflection activities or any reflection activities where students can not only talk about some academic resources or writing essays, but also reflect on their own skills and abilities and reflect on how they can improve them. So basically, students in everyday life, we tend to we do not have a lot of extra time to maybe sit and reflect by ourselves. So if maybe professors, instructors would give us like assignments where we have to reflect, I think it would be really helpful for students to improve their skills, maybe see what they are missing maybe and what they can improve. And also I think that here students can also share their own experience with their peers. So especially during this online learning, for example, we do not have a lot of connection with our peers. We are not communicating that much as we could do it offline. So and in this discourse community, we can share what we are struggling about, maybe see that we are not the only one who might have some difficulties with writing process, and maybe also share our suggestions, maybe how we improved some of the aspects, or maybe just discuss some points in writing process. So I believe that maybe implementing some reflectional activities into the rhetorics and composition course would be really helpful for instructors in improving the writing skills of the students and for students themselves. Thank you for your attention. I think that's all, and I would like to give it back.
Thank you, Deanna.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Kirk, thank you for your presentation as well. And thanks to Shane for covering my absence while Zoom dropped me. So I sort of missed the ending in the beginning. But I could see Deanna, you picking up the points that Kirk left off with. And I wanted to thank you for giving us some advice for how we can better improve the reflective experience of students in this first year composition course, which surprisingly results in more writing for you guys. So I'm all for that. More assignments for everyone. Okay, so now that we've finished the presentations from our three excellent presenters, I'd like to turn to the questions we have in chat. We have about 10 minutes left in this session. And so I'll take these in order, if that's okay. Presenters, can you see the chat? Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah. Shane?
Yes.
Okay, because the first one's for you, Shane.
Yes.
So the first question is from Jorge Sanchez. First of all, Dr. Sanchez, thank you for signing on at 1 o'clock in the morning from Argentina. The first question is from Dr. Sanchez, who asks, do students write abstracts? And then a similar question, I guess, what models do you apply for students for writing essays, abstracts, and research papers?
Yeah, so at our level for the 150 program, we don't cover abstracts specifically. There's another course, the WCS 210 course, which is a technical writing course, and they do focus on abstract writing. That said, some of the work that we do, some of the assignments that we have do incorporate elements that feed directly into the creation, that would feed into the creation of an abstract. I mean, we do a lot of work with summarizing, and that usually comes into several different assignments that we have, which, you know, the process of summarizing means, okay, being able to analyze or read through a text, identify the core concepts, the core information, and then, you know, rephrase that to your own words. And of course, applying that to your own writing. I mean, there's a similar process involved in creating an abstract, or at least when I taught 210, that was kind of the approach we used. Going to you had another question about the models that we use. No, I wouldn't say there's a particular model that we apply, although, you know, these things, you know, the CARS model and genre analysis, you know, swales, these do kind of come into play into what we do. Now, in regards to the amount of genre analysis that we do, I think that sometimes there may be variations amongst teachers as to how much of that type of work they do with their students. I typically like to do genre analysis. I like students to be exposed to different types of writing, especially academic writing. So, in my reading list for my particular sections, I always have a combination of different types of writing, and I will always make sure that there's an academic component, an academic article or journal article for them to read as well, as along with the other readings that they do. And from that, I often use that as a stepping stone into discussions of formatting, of stylistic techniques or whatnot. So there is some element of that, though I wouldn't say we specifically say we are using Swale's model of genre analysis or the CARS model of, but I would say definitely with the CARS model, definitely that does come into play in other courses, such as 210, as an example. I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but that's, yeah.
Okay, Dr. Sanchez, if that didn't quite answer the question, you can feel free, please, to type in a request for clarification in our chat. Thank you, Shane. And I'd like to move on to a question now for Kirk from Jane, who's one of our colleagues here. Jane asks if she understands correctly, this speaks to the idea of keywording and the use of metacognition as an example of keywording. And Jane would like to know if you can give us 2 more examples of keywords that you use and that have evolved out of your reflection on classroom experience.
Okay, great. First of all, hi, Jane. Thank you for your question. Yeah, metacognition is definitely, this is a primary keyword. And the reason that I use it as an example is because it is one of the keywords that doesn't necessarily, let's say, obviously or explicitly feature in the writing practice text that we use, right? They say, I say. There might be some discussion of it, but so this is why I use an example. However, in terms of other keywords that are primary to what I do, or what we all do really, is literally, like I said, I use the syllabus to use the title of the course to introduce keywords, right? So rhetoric is the big one, and we return to rhetoric all of the time, right? I think that this is something about treating rhetoric like a keyword where we're just always acknowledging when it pops up, when it reemerges, where we're acknowledging kind of differences in or maybe these new kinds of communication that we're asking students to engage in. So rhetoric is a big one, but it's the usual suspect. Synthesis, right, is something that is, is one of these keywords. And then when we get to really talking about organization and paragraph level things, coherence, unity, all of these things that we can just constantly underscore and highlight and define or describe every time we talk about them, so that this shared language, like we really create a lexicon. It's about having a dialect that is just easy to reinforce and return to. And like I said, the words themselves become artifacts. Concepts are broad. These keywords can be carried around. And I think that's the point. So all of the ones you're used to, Jane, I think the really difference in keywording is just to be annoying about it with your students, right? And just keep bringing it up again and again. So I hope that answers your question, Jane.
Thanks, Kirk. This is sort of like in the more advanced courses, I use the terminology of walking the walk and talking the talk. So we want them to be using the terminology that we're talking about in class.
Exactly.
It circles back onto what you were talking about, is the classroom as being, one of the goals of the classroom is creating a discourse community. So it's that reinforcing that social aspect of writing, and developing writing through learning, learning through writing.
Yep.
Okay, a second question from Jane. Which of the 4 sources that you've cited or others have most informed the activities that you assign in the writing process journal?
So the prompts themselves. So I will say naming what you know is just a favorite of mine. I was asked to engage with it very early in my training and preparation, right? For the very first time I was going to teach at college, a first year college writing course, right? And kind of fell in love with it. So I encourage everyone to engage with that, because the sheer amount of threshold concepts that they provide, right? It just clarifies things, and it takes, sometimes we take these concepts for granted, but it activates them, or at least for me. So that's one that really reinforces it. But I will say it's not necessarily, these prompts aren't necessarily always coming from this point of pedagogical theory. I mean, they're often coming from my experience in communications with the students themselves. So as much as an outside source, would inspire me to assign reflective writing assignments. It's the experiences of the students just gained, again, through like this kind of collaborative discourse community environment that will help me develop these prompts. I mean, like I said, in the artifact that I provide is the form that the journal appears in now, right? These 10 prompts. It changes, right? It changes from term to term based on the responses that I see sometimes in those reflective journals. So yeah,
Okay.
That's my answer there.
Okay, and Deanna wants more of those. In your class.
I have a question for Deanna.
Okay.
Deanna, do you apply this reflection now? I mean, I know that we had a conversation that you're undeclared, but your intention is language and literatures, right? But you're also taking all of these other classes that are in this kind of space of humanities and social sciences, and you're writing a lot this term, right? So does this concept of reflection, is it still useful to you? I mean, do you engage in it directly or maybe kind of like in the back of your mind? I'm just curious because you don't have a lot of time, but I'm wondering if the whole concept of reflection is still of use when you're trying to kind of organize your ideas and think about writing assignments.
Yeah, as I said before, when it's not like given as an assignment, it is hard to like give it the time to like just sit and reflect on something. But I think that because I did it like whole semester, I just have it, as you said, like in my back mind, maybe something there, maybe I'm just doing it unconsciously, but I think that sometimes I do the reflection because to keep up with the courses and writings and everything. So I do not do it like as much as I did it during the course of rhetorics and composition, but still sometimes I give it a time.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. We have a couple of questions left in the chat, but we are also out of time. So I will ask if you are interested in striking up a conversation with any of our panelists, or you have more specific questions going forward, or we couldn't get to yours this time, please do feel free to send those to us at the Writing Talks. writingtalks@nu.edu.kz email address, and do specify which panelist you would like to field your question, and we can forward that to them. This presentation will be made available on our website, and in probably in a couple of weeks' time, when we've had a chance to do the subtitling, we'll have a version of the recorded session available with Russian subtitles and also with Kazakh subtitles. Okay. And we do intend to make this a yearly event. So we'll refine at least maybe our Wi-Fi connections before the next event comes. This symposium lasts throughout the month of April. So our next panel is next Saturday at 11 o'clock. And this panel has to do with creative writing, writing to create, and using creative writing in a research environment. So please, everyone who signed up for this panel, please do join us next week as well. Okay, the link will be different. I'll send it out to you via email. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Deanna. Thank you, Kirk. Everyone, have a really lovely day.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Carrie. Thank you, Diana and Shane. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.